Now we will learn another method to factor trinomials. Now I want you to know that the grouping method and this method works for any type of trinomial. And even it works for binomials because like if you want to factor something like this for x squared minus, let's say, 9, the a is 4, yes, the c is negative 9, but the b is not there, so I can put the b as being a 0. So you can still use the grouping method or factoring method to factor something like this. However, if you use the difference of two squares, and then you can know right away that the two factors are 2x minus 3 and 2x plus 3, and that would be faster if you recognize the pattern. However, if you forgot how to factor using the difference of two squares, you can always use this method or the grouping method. So again, this method, which is called the bottoms up method, and the grouping method works for any type of trinomial, and it works for binomials like this. Okay, with that said, let's see how this works. Now I like this method because it's quick, especially when we get to polynomials later on in quarter 3, and you need to factor a couple of problems in one problem. So you need something quick and simple, and this is a quick method if you understand it. So what do we do to use the trick method or bottoms up method? You always start the same way. Whenever you look at the trinomial, in this case 2x to the power 2 minus x minus 15, you always multiply a times c, and that is a negative 30 in this case. So you want two numbers that would multiply to give you ac, which is negative 30, and add to give you b, which is a negative 1 in this case. So you start the same way as the grouping method. Now let's figure out what those two numbers are. So negative 30. What multiplies to give me negative 30 and add to give me negative 1? Now the two numbers I'm thinking of are negative 6 and 5, because negative 6 times 5 is a negative 30, and then negative 6 plus 5 is a negative 1. So the two numbers are negative 6 and 5. So far there's no change. Now what happens after here is how this method is different from the grouping method. Once you find those two numbers, negative 6 and 5, you try to divide by a. Now a in this case is a 2, so you're trying to factor out the 2 from negative 6 and 5. So then you have negative 6 over 2 and 5 over 2. Once you divide by a, try to simplify the fraction if it's possible. So negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. 5 over 2 is not factorable, so I don't want you to put a decimal. You cannot simplify this fraction. So don't divide 5 over 2 and put 2.5. Keep it as a fraction. And it's a positive fraction, so let's put plus 5 over 2. So once you divide by a, so put the number over a, and simplify the fraction if it's possible, then put x in front of each of those numbers, and those will be your two factors. So x minus 3 is my first factor, and x plus 5 over 2 is your second factor. But if you have a fraction left, or if you have a bottom to this fraction, take it up and put it next to the x. That's why it's called the bottoms up method. So x minus 3, and now it becomes 2x plus 5, and that would be your second factor. Quick, easy, to the point. Okay? Now to check your work, you can always distribute or FOIL, and you will see it's exactly the same. It will give you 2x to the power 2 minus x minus 15. Now I would like you to pause the video and try the second trinomial on your own using this method. The first thing I should do is check if there's a GCF. So I have a 12, a 4, and a 1, so there's nothing in common. I have x to the power 2x, and there's no x, so there's no x in common, so there's no GCF. Now I check if x to the power 2 has a coefficient, which is 12 in this case. If the coefficient is 1, then that would be a mental math problem. I just think of the two numbers that multiply to give me C and add to give me B, and I'm done. However, if there's an A, you have to multiply A times C, which is in this case a negative 12. So you need two numbers that multiply to give you negative 12. And two numbers, the same two numbers, should add to give you negative 4. So what multiplies to give me negative 12 and add to give me 4? I'm thinking of 6 and 2. 6 times 2 is 12. Now one of them has to be negative because I have a negative 12. So if I add them, they have to give me a negative 4. So then the 6 should be the negative. Let's try. Negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. And negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. Exactly the same as the grouping method. Now, what happens next is different. Once you find those two numbers, you divide by A, which is in this case a 12. So you divide by 12. Now simplify the fraction if it's possible. So 6 and 12, 6 over 12, will simplify to a negative 1 over 2. 2 over 12 will simplify to 1 over 6. So my two numbers are negative 1/2 and positive 1/6. Put x in front of each of the numbers, and these will be your two factors. But there's one more thing you need to do. Bottoms up. If you are left with a fraction, the bottom of the fraction should go in front of the x. So 2x minus 1 and 6x plus 1. Now remember to check your work. You can always FOIL to see if this factored form will give you the trinomial 12x to the power 2 minus 4x minus 1. Let's check. 2x times 6x, that's 12x squared. 2x times 1, that's 2x. Negative 1 times 6x, that's negative 6x. So combine those two. Negative 6x and positive 2x, that's negative 4x. Negative 1 times 1, that's a negative 1. So that would be my factored form. And that's the end of the second method, which is the bottoms up method.